where I thought would be a good place to begin would be if you could give us like a brief biographical sketch of Rabbi Lamm's rabbinic career, because I know he was in a couple different shuls,
Sure.
and just his origin story and his trajectory.
Sure, absolutely. And pleasure to be on to join you and to
Yeah,
be
it's an
able to,
honor.
to talk and learn together. Rabbi Lamm was born in 1927. He lives in New York for pretty much his entire life. And it's interesting. On the one hand, his parents are not rabbis, but on the other hand, on his mother's side, he comes from a Hasidic, rabbinic, if not full-fledged dynasty, certainly there's certainly a lot of rabbinic stock on that side of the family. And so he grows up, he davens at one of his primary rebbeim's shul. Rabbanim was really his grandfather, of Yehoshua Dalmo, who authored 2 volumes of the Shelos Utshuvos Emek Halacha. And he was a very interesting Hamish Rav, no Torah Mada there. Then was once asked about that. He said, no, he was a Hamish Rav. It wasn't that wasn't his thing. It was very interesting in that he was what Rabbi Lamm saw as kind of the best model of a chassid in the sense that he combined a real commitment to Hasidic tradition and to Hasidic learning as well. That's where he got his love for Hasidus together with outstanding Torah scholarship. So anything that would have made him Misnagid proud or impressed, at least, like he could. Ray would talk about it. He could just recite Tososim, Baal Peh, just like cite him like Shavuos Tav Chaveh. He would just go. So he was really just a larger than life Talmid Chacham, an inspiration for Rabbi Lamm. And he grew up davening at a shul very often, hearing his drashos when Rabbi Lamm was still like a young Norman Lamm, a child. Nachum going to his shul. He graduates from Torah Das at roughly age 17, spends 1 year in between there and Yeshiva University, actually learning in the mornings with his grandfather, spending the afternoons at a local library, reading all Freud, reading philosophy very broadly, and this is where he starts to develop his very broad intellectual interests. He then enters Yeshiva University approximately age 18, with his eyes initially on becoming a chemist. He studies science. He graduates as valedictorian of Yeshiva College and thinking quite seriously about pursuing that path. And Dr. Belkin, the president of Yeshiva University, persuades him that to know that his calling is in the Rabbanos, is in the rabbinate, and he is indeed persuaded. So they decide to enter into Smicha.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
it's interesting that you mentioned that he was pursuing a career in chemistry because one of the sermons that I read, there was a story about an accidental discovery by a chemist. And I thought that was just an off, one-off story, but I guess in context of what you're saying, that was that was really in his mother's milk.
Yeah, and so once in a while he would introduce it. It wasn't like everywhere in his drashos, but every once in a while, and you just read it, and you're like, wow, like all of a sudden he's like at a different level, right? It's like you're like, what's going on? I don't know anything he's talking about. And it's because he had that training. There's a great story in 1948. There's a YouTube online about it, where actually he and some other students volunteered for the nascent Israel army in developing materials for weaponry for the Independence War in a clandestine upstate New York laboratory. So he did put it to good use. But he did move in a different direction. He ultimately, he does some graduate studies, but he ultimately graduates with the smicha. His first pulpit position is as an intern for then Rabbi Luxstein, Rabbi Joseph Luxstein. We're going back at KJ, Kilat Jeshua on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which is then as it is now a leading modern Orthodox pulpit, and Rabbi Luxstein becomes kind of his second major mentor when it comes to sermonics, when it comes to writing a drasha. His grandfather, not in an immediate way, but kind of as a larger influence, someone he listened to and worked with growing up.
What year is this?
This is 1951 he starts, so he's 24 years old. He spends a year working for Rabbi Luxstein. The earliest drashos that are available online on the Lower Merion website come from this era, mostly handwritten, and you see what was amazing. And I spoke with him about this. He would share that he and Rabbi Luxstein would prepare They'd have it kind of like a pregame, and then they would have a postgame. So what he would do is they would essentially, right, Rabbi Lamm would have ideas, and Rabbi looks would just tear it to shreds, just take it, just rip it apart, and help him reconstruct it. And then Rabbi Lamm would deliver the sermon, and we meet afterward, and Rabbi looks would give him feedback. And then very often, or at least on a couple of occasions, Rabbi Lamm actually described, you can see this on some of his sermons, Rabbi Lookstein's feedback. Which is just
I noticed that this morning. I was going to ask you. So JHL, those initials are for Joseph.
Joseph Haskell Lookstein. Yeah. So Joseph H. No, Haskell's the son. I actually don't know what the H stands for, but it's actually yeah. So but anyhow, but that's JHL is Rabbi Lookstein.
And so that feedback because I noticed a couple of the sermons had that first you have the sermon and then afterwards there's a page where it says, it's like a debrief where there's, this is what I did and this is JHL's criticism, constructive criticism. And so that was when he was a rabbinic intern?
That is, yeah. And he would insist on speaking as much as possible. He was just very committed to the art of sermonics. Like he took very seriously. You see this, they were much longer, first of all, than anything anyone could stand for or sit for that matter nowadays. And he took it really seriously. He spoke often at Mincha, which
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Mincha sermon. I'm like, where's an opportunity for a sermon at Mincha?
Yeah, I never discuss it with him. My assumption is that we're talking about either before Mincha or between Mincha and Maariv. And I don't know if they had more than, there's probably no hashkama or something like that where he could naturally speak on a regular basis. And it seems like there was an opportunity for him to speak presumably with Rabbi Lookstein present, which is kind of the goal. So in other words, because he's an intern and he sees himself as really developing the craft, for him to have Rabbi Lookstein present is absolutely essential. So, you imagine that Rabbi Lookstein would give the Midrash in the morning, and then in the afternoon, Rabbi Lamm would give, essentially the equivalent of something he might have given in the morning to maybe a smaller audience, but it's essentially the same thing. And he's preparing himself, and Rabbi Lookstein would be there. Yeah.
I'm blown away by the level of mastery of what you're saying is that's an era from when he was a rabbinic intern, or just a rabbinic intern at that point. I mean, it's better than most stuff you see from veterans.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I mean, he just took it so seriously, so committed to it, and he was a polymath. And like I said, when he was 17, he was just reading extremely broadly. He was very inspired. I should add, certainly by the Rav. Salvation was the third of his, major inspirations of his grandfather, Rabbi Lamm, Rabbi Lookstein, and the Rav. Those were kind of like his three either role models or direct mentors when it came to developing a drasha and came to sermonics. And he would remark about the Rav that the Rav knew so much. He just knew everything. Everything was at his fingertips, Tanakh and all of Shas and all of Midrash and all of Zohar and, all of Kabbalah. And he knew Chassidus and all of this, plus general wisdom, all this. And he has a great line. He said, the Rav would luxuriate in drush. He didn't just deliver excellent sermons or drashas. He would luxuriate because he was just free to roam. And it just, so Rabbi Lamm would never have said that about himself. And it certainly wasn't true to the degree of the Rav. He would not be very happy from up high. If I were to sit here and say, just like the Rav, he'd say, it's just Narishkeit, it's Avodah Zarah. But that was, he was just very, very broad and took it very seriously. A lot of research did.
Can I ask you, I don't know if you would have insight into this, but what was their relationship in terms of feedback and criticism? Did Rabbi Lamm seek it out? Did he ever battle him on it? What was their relationship in terms of teacher and disciple in this regard?
You're talking about the Rav now?
No. Yeah, Rabbi Lamm and Rabbi Lookstein. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. He was very interested in as a young man in learning, and he always said, if you want to learn how to do something well, if you want to learn how to speak well, listen to the best speakers that you can find. Listen to the best speeches, right? I listened to a recording. He would say, "I have a dream." It doesn't, right? And the content is powerful, and inspiring. That wasn't even what was kind of driving him. That is just listen for the cadences, listen for the turns of phrase, listen for the repetition. I have a dream. I have a dream. How exactly he delivered it, all of that. Listen how slowly he spoke.
Yeah.
These
Yeah,
kinds of
the rhetoric, I was really blown away by his command of rhetoric, where he uses terms that contrast, the alliteration that he uses. I'm just going to read off a couple of things that I was amazed by. He was talking about he was, again, one of the themes I think is against American Jewry. A lot of the use the word edifice complex, which I
Oh yeah.
unbelievable. I mean, that's Shakespearean. How people just the worship of the building, and he said,
Yes.
celebrating. Are we celebrating banquets or benedictions, parties? And do we emphasize prayers or parties, pulpit or platform, dinim or dinners, services or socials? I mean, you can feel that cadence and that rhythm and the alliteration there. It's very powerful.
Yeah,
Where
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're saying that he picked that up from he would listen to other speakers to learn how to
Yeah,
do
he
that.
listened to Rabbi Lookstein. Rabbi Lookstein, he studied Rabbi Lookstein as a speaker, like he would study a Black Gemara, like he would study a Black Gemara. I mean, he would analyze him. He used to remark about the difference between Rabbi Lookstein's regular Shabbos drashos and his Yom Noraim drashos. The former were like much more traditional sermons, which a lot of substance, and talk about how all of a sudden, because the crowd would change. Talking about 1950s orthodoxy, non-orthodoxy, the crowd, just like overflowing on high holidays with people that Rabbi Lamm, who was a rabbinic intern for, never would see again, for the rest of the year. And Rabbi Lookstein, he said, he would become a completely different kind of orator. He would speak, he would go Shakespeare by heart, wax poetic, and he would say beautiful, exquisite things, and you would feel so uplifted. And you would ask yourself at the end what Rabbi Lookstein said, and you'd say, I have no idea. Wow, is that powerful? It's like a completely different kind of Josh. A good kind of way. And it says, who do I want to be? Who's my audience? And what would they need? And he really studied the art of the sermon. The other thing he did is he learned, he was a voracious reader, and he studied vocabulary. He basically read the dictionary when he was a kid, not literally, but all but. When he was a child, his parents, one thing he would say is that they gave him a drop of money for every new word that he would memorize, like a nickel or something like that. Like that was a lot of money back then. And so he made it rich not only in terms of the nickels, but in terms of his vocabulary, and that stayed with him throughout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so how long did that stint last as rabbinic intern at KJ over there?
So he's there just for 1 year. It's the 1951 to 1952. He then takes a pulpit. This is probably the least known period of his rabbinic career. He is at the west side. He takes a little bit of time off. He's like, I think it's learning smicha, like a little bit of time. That was like an internship. It was while he was preparing for the rabbinate, but it wasn't like he was immediately necessarily applying for pulpits all the way through. And then from 1950, no, so I guess it was immediate. I take it back. 1952 to 1953, sorry, he becomes the rabbi of the West Side Jewish Center, which has been confused often with the West Side Jewish Institute. So this is a different shul. He's there for relatively short amount of time, for only about 10 months or so. And that's kind of a formative experience for him, but he continues to study and he continues to look. And then, that's a really interesting time in its own right, a very interesting community. And that's the one where becomes, I would say, most familiar with what he calls out, and I think I shared this with you ahead of time, right? He calls out as the Kaddish cult, or the Yizkor cult. And this is, also he's 1959, 53. So he's 25, 26 years old. He's, again, still just getting started with his career. And it's fascinating. I remember I was reading through the drushos, and first it's roughly, I don't remember, it's February, March of 1953. So this is, he starts in 52, around the time of the Yom Noraim, and then, so this is already, he's been at the pulpit for about 5 months, and I guess he felt comfortable enough, 5 months in, how many rabbis do this, ripping what he calls the Kaddish cult. And he's talking about people, including people presumably in the pews, who are driven to Judaism, but only stay for the recitation of Kaddish. Now, at that time, it makes sense. We're also talking about only a few years after the Shoah, which, we'll come to in terms of Yizkor in particular. It's a different time in Jewish history, and you can imagine that many colleagues of his might have said, look, they're coming to shul. Like why criticize people who work on Shabbos? They do this. That was just the generation, and at least they're coming. Now he appreciated that, he valued that, but what it was the people who said, at least they're coming, so let's stop there. And that really irked him. It's like, we can't be satisfied with mediocrity. We'll have no future as an American orthodoxy if people come to our shuls and we say, thank you so much for coming. Now go home, and it has no bearing on whether you eat chazer treif and whether you keep Shabbos and whether there's, you have a kosher kitchen. And he talks about Taras HaMishpacha explicitly, at a time when no one else is talking about, these kinds of things, and mikvah, etc. And he calls it out, and that's about Kaddish. Then,
Can I dwell on that for a moment? So I read that sermon. He likened it to paganism, which was really
incipient paganism is the title.
It's really bold. Now, the thing that struck me, and I'm trying to understand this, he began by saying that he noticed that there was I'm trying to see if I can find the word here. He said that the size of the Yisrael crowd was between 8,000 and 9,000 people.
So exactly. That's where I was going. So the one about Kaddish that I just mentioned, so that one was about 2 months before this one that you're describing that I sent you. They're very similar ones. And that's sort of exactly to this point. So what happens is as follows. So it's the last day of Pesach, 1953. That's his first Pesach at this pulpit. It ends up being his only. Within a year later, he's already moving on to his next pulpit. We'll come to that soon. But he describes, how there was a completely different crowd on Acharon Shel Pesach in West Side Jewish Center, 1953. And, the truth that even the sermon that he actually delivered that day, it's totally differently than anything I had ever seen. I actually read them all considered. Started from the beginning of his time at that shul, going through, and they're all, kind of classic drushos, what you would expect. And all of a sudden, he comes to that drusha, and first of all, he introduces himself. Okay, so this is on Pesach. It's like the one immediately before the one that you're describing about incipient paganism, which he delivered Shabbos after. So right before that, he's speaking the last day of Pesach. First, he's introducing himself. I'm so confused. I'm reading this. He's been in the pulpit for 6-7 months. I said, hello, my name is Rabbi Norman Lamm. What is going on? I'm so confused. And then he gives this drasha. It's short and it's simplistic, and it assumes nothing on the part, next to nothing, of Jewish knowledge on the part of, his listener. What's going on? This doesn't fit anything that I know. But it's just a drasha. I just read it, and that's it. And then I come to the next one. And this is the one where he rails against the Yizkor cult, and he calls it incipient paganism, as you say. And he's talking about 8,000, 9,000 people. And I haven't spoken to his historian, but it sounds like what happened was they had, first of all, they just had massive amounts of people. It was near Midtown, Manhattan. So you just have like random people off the street who have no connection to the shul. They're only coming for Yizkor, maybe not even Rosh Hashanah, maybe not even Yom Kippur, but the one time they're coming is for Yizkor. And presumably, a lot of people who had maybe lost family in the Shoah or, that sort of thing. And it even sounds like there are, I'm not certain about this, but my impression is that they didn't even only come, they didn't, not only did they not necessarily show up for shul except for Yizkor, but there was like a Yizkor factory. That was what it sounded like
Oh,
to me.
wow.
It's like, you just like come to Yizkor, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, the Yizkor slots. Because I don't think that sanctuary could fit 8,000, 9,000
Yeah,
people.
I was having a hard time
It
understanding
sounds
that.
like it was in waves, no wonder he was giving like these mini, just like sounds like giving mini dress shows. But that's like the amazing thing is that this 25, 26-year-old kid is then, saying, this is not enough. Right? We can't just say that, oh, at least they showed up. Of course it's good they showed up. But this cannot be the be-all and end-all of Judaism in the 1950s because we're done. That's our approach. Like at least they came for Yizkor and it's over. You don't follow up and invite them back to shul and inspire real commitment to real Judaism. It was the 1950s. Marshall Slayer was declaring the death of, imminent death of Orthodox Judaism. Conservative was on the ascendant, was ascendant at that time. He says we're dead. So he pulls it out as it is. It's unbelievable.
And that was the beginning of a theme that he spoke about over and over and over, it seems like throughout the 50s and maybe even the 60s, I guess, about
Yeah.
he talks about, it's interesting. He mentioned that there's this myopic focus on anti-Semitism and relationships with the Pope, and yet we're like assimilating and there's ignorance is rampant. I'm almost wondering what he would have said today. Where it's, we seem to be in kind of a better place, at least in terms of education. Yet now anti-Semitism has started to rear its head again.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And we could always play that game, what would Rabbi so-and-so have said, But you're right, he was very attuned to the needs of his time, and his drashos shifted over time. It's like fascinating. Like if you weren't looking at style, right, and consistency in terms of just looking at content, you could read some of his earliest drashos, from these periods, and then some of his latest drashos at the Jewish Center, especially after the Yom Kippur War, where he talks about Israel for 9 months straight, and he blasts the UN time and time again. And just this morning, the Hague issued its its preliminary ruling about is Israel committing genocide? And we're not going to go that far, but Israel's going to have to, should abide by the fine, whatever. And he just calls out these so-called, even minded, fair-minded, quote unquote friends, just rips them. And totally different than the drashos he's given in the 1950s, where he's much more interested in our own commitment. So you're right. He had a very consistent hashkafa and a very consistent style and approach to giving his drashos, which just was refined over the course of the decades. But he was very attuned to the topics being relevant to the needs of his community in the time that they needed it.
I'm curious, under Rabbi Joseph Lookstein's tutelage, he taught him, I'm sure, a lot of style. How much did he influence his hashkafas in terms of what Rabbi Lamm felt was necessary to impart as a young rabbi?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to know for sure. What I would say is that Rabbi Lamm, I think he got a lot more in the way of style and polish, and also just Rabbi Lookstein was in his shul, which is renowned for the dignity of the pulpit. Rabbi Lamm was a little bit different in that respect. He didn't feel he should overplay the importance of formality. He talked about it can become a kind of a ceremonious, empty, distant Judaism that doesn't really, he was much more interested in the substance, than in the trappings. But he did appreciate the importance, and he wrote and he spoke regularly about the importance of having a dignified orthodoxy. Most of that, I think, was, I wouldn't say most of that was due to the influence of Rabbi Lookstein, but that Rabbi Lookstein played a larger kind of role in terms of most of those things. I don't think there was a specific message that Rabbi Luxi necessarily gave that became a message that Rabbi Lamm took, but it was more this idea of thinking independently. What does my congregation really, really need right now? And I think my sense is that Rabbi Luxin's drashos might have been less Musar oriented. Rabbi Lamm was from a very young age very sharp. I mean, especially the Yom Noram I mentioned. I know the crowd was different, but I'm sure it was different in the Jewish center as well. From during most of his career, from 58 to 1976, and while he's careful and he couches things in a sensitive way, he does. I mean, he spares no one and nothing. It's like, very easily, we think most rabbis who do this, you're gone, you're done, like you're over. You have to be brilliant and beloved and all of these things to pull that off. So I don't think Rabbi Luxi was giving drashos like that. I think it was more that just this notion of, okay, where is my congregation holding? Where do I move them? How am I going to get them to that place and really do it in a way that really speaks to them in a polished and professional way?
Yeah. I was also very struck by the in that Yizkor sermon. He talks about the analogy of the three types of simanim for a kosher bird, and he makes that analogous to American Jewry, and it was brilliant, and I'm wondering, where did he learn that style of drush from? Was that something that was where did he pull that from? What were his?
Yeah, such a good point. Rabbi Luxi did do some of those things. It's really interesting. I haven't gone through all Rabbi Luxstein's too many Rabbi Luxstein's drashos, but one of the ones that you mentioned, where Rabbi Luxstein, where it's a JHL on the back, you see his feedback, is really interesting. One of them, he said, Rabbi Luxstein commented, said, like, this point just wasn't that novel. It just wasn't that interesting. He said, and he urged Rabbi Lamm to not say what his community had already heard. We've all kind of heard this, at various times. I always think of the Shmini Atzeres drasha. It's like, and Rabbanim would do this, especially in this creative way. The goal is not to, the God forbid, be critical, but I always think of the classic example being when a rabbi gets up and quotes Kashe Alei Pri Daschem, right? Like, it's very difficult for me to separate from you, and therefore that's why I have Shmini Atzeres. And it's something you've heard, every single year, like, right? That kind of thing. You're like itching and wondering, saying, like, tell me something novel, tell me something I didn't think of, tell me something I didn't know. And he could have said to himself, well, my communities, quite frankly, are not very well Jewishly educated, but he never underestimated the fact that they heard him speak the year before or even 10 years before. But he never, ever spoke down to his audiences. But he also recognized he was teaching them Torah and that they were going to be excited to the extent that they were learning something new and interesting and creative. And that was really what he was looking to do. And the other thing, just very quickly, is that on halacha, he doesn't usually use halacha, but he does sometimes use halacha. Here, the Rav was the model for you. It's very interesting. I can say, like, people think of the Rav as halachic man, isha halacha, which certainly was a very important piece of who the Rav was, right? As you talk about halacha, and we're not going to take that and turn that into something else entirely. No, we're going to be authentic to the internal logic of the halachic system. Rabbi Lamm said, sure, that was true in Gemara Shir. That's what we did, and that would be true at his annual Yortzeit Shir for his father, where he would learn halacha and then extrapolate from there to drush. But the Rav gave drush. He gave drush to in Boston and in New York when he was speaking to broader communities, and they weren't yeshiva students. Those were the communities that Rabbi Lamm was speaking to as well during his pulpit years in particular. And so he would always say that the Rav, when he was exerting drush, part of it wasn't just Zohar and Achshava, Tanakh and Midrash, etc., but it was also halacha. And the Rav would use halacha as a way of a medium for drush as well. And he was, in particular, using, kashrus or other metaphors,
Yeah.
That's Rabbi Lamm as well.
Did you notice in your going through all the sermons, did he ever recycle ideas?
Yeah, great question. Rare, almost never in the same pulpit. but very much so, from pulpit to pulpit. And he was so copiously organized that he would actually label the drasha. He actually, some of them didn't even appear twice. A couple of them where it's essentially the same drasha. You're like, wait a second. And if you really read them through systematically, you go back and you can match them up, all that. But more often than not, what he does is he actually will label a single drasha on top. So he'll say Westside Jewish Center, just for example, November, what Shabbat, whatever, November 3rd, 1953. And then he went to Springfield, to Kadima. He was there for, 1954, 1958. And he'll say Springfield, whatever it might be, December, 6th, 1955, and then Jewish Center, whatever date, November 23, 1959. And he would actually have them listed one under the other, under the other. And it speaks to his organization. He had just an uncanny discipline about him, not only writing down the drushos, every single Motzei Shabbos, he sat down and he either refined or rewrote the drasha. He would always say there's the drasha that you should have given, the drasha you did give, the drasha you planned to give, the drasha you did give, and the drasha you should have given. Those are the three drashos that every rabbi always has. Actually write them down every single Motzei Shabbos. But not only that, he then put them in his filing system, and he just kept them over the decades, and that's ultimately how they came to be online. He was really systematic in that way. Sometimes the Jewish Center, because there were different minyanim, there's like an auxiliary minyan. One Rosh Hashanah he would speak to one audience, and then the next Rosh Hashanah he would speak in the main minyan, or vice versa. And it seems like they were almost always the same people. So there'd be very little crossover from year to year from one of those to the other. So within the Jewish Center, he did that as well. But very rarely did he give the same drasha, if ever, to the same audience, even 10, 15 years later at the Jewish Center.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, the typewritten sermons that I saw that had notes in the margins and notes at the end, were those the sermons that were typed up that he read from as he delivered them, or were those the typed up versions after he had delivered them on Saturday?
So it really depended. If he felt like there were too many typos or things that, just very slight changes that he made in real time, he would retype them. But more often than not, actually, they were typed, and then you would see like his handwriting when he's making those corrections, that sort of thing. Those were things that he refined over the course of Shabbos, or he rethought when he actually was delivering the sermon. But either way, he would always lock himself up and make sure that he had something that could remain for posterity.
Yeah. It was interesting to see. So in one of the sermons, it says that this is what I ended up doing. Instead of, I shortened the first paragraph, I shortened the second one, I used a different metaphor or something like that. That obviously seems to be post-delivery.
Exactly, yeah. And that's his earliest ones, right? I'm pretty sure that's a KJ one. That's a Revel looks one. And so he's like, even, someone who was such an outstanding orator, who's young, he's getting started, and he wasn't afraid to change things up and give the best drasha to his audience then, and not just say, oh, I'm married to what I planned I was going to give. I'm reading my audience. They can't, this is not going to work to give like this such a long drasha. I way overestimated how much time I have or whatever it may be, instead of just saying, oh, this is what I prepared, this is all I can do. The 24-year-old Rabbi Norman Lamm says, no, I'm going to give half the drasha I planned.
So he would edit on the fly, like while he was delivering it, he would make that game time decision. Okay, we're going to truncate.
Mostly, yeah. I mean, most of the drasha was overwhelmingly complete at that moment, and it was highly unusual during most of his years, especially once he was, a full rabbi, which is most of his career. He's, including his time at the Jewish Center, is technically an assistant for a long time, but he's essentially, one of the, rabbi of the shul. He's doing very small editing. It's only in those earliest ones where he really just kind of rips it up, or really just omits major sections.
Yeah. Did he maintain that relationship with Rabbi Lookstein after he left the shul? Did he still seek him out for mentorship and
That's a good question. I think he would like run ideas by him. It became more of like a Talmud Chaver type relationship. I think once that time had passed.
Mhm.
But I think that the image of Rabbi Lupstein in his head was always as like a Rebbe for sermonics. Like he was always like one of the great, darshanim of this generation in terms of polish, in terms of style, and in terms of just the ability to package something for the community that would move them. And I think like he saw him as a Rebbe for this matter all the way till the end.
Did Rabbi Lookstein consider him to be his star pupil?
That's a good question. I think there were others as well, but I think they maintained a close relationship and certainly thought very, very highly of Rabbi Lamm. I don't know if I can say that he's singled out Rabbi Lamm as like the prize student. Remember, he had his own son who went to the pulpit as well. Although actually, Rabbi Lamm studied as an older charusa or tutor, or whatever it was, for a young Ben Haskell Lookstein, Rabbi Lookstein's son. So the fact that Rabbi Lookstein Sr. set up Rabbi Lamm Jr. to learn with the even more junior Rabbi Haskell Lookstein in terms of just his age, I think speaks to just how highly he thought of this young rabbi.
What's their age difference?
It's a good question. I'm going to say guessing. I'm not certain. I'm guessing 5-7 years. Rabbi Lamm passed away when he was 92. Maybe more like 3 to 5 years. That's my guess. So I hope quite old now. That would be my guess, although I'm not certain. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question that's been burning in my mind, which is after I had a conversation with Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz, who's now the senior rabbi at KJ.
Sure.
And so he said that Rabbi Lamm's son, Maurice Lamm,
his brother,
his brother, I'm sorry, his brother, said that he told him that Rabbi Joseph Lookstein used to every Shabbos morning would pace for about an hour and a half in his living room, setting the sermon, getting the sermon all ready for the way he wanted to deliver it. And he said that Rabbi Haskell Lookstein used to watch this, and he said, "I never want to go through what he's going through." And so I don't know if you ever heard that before, but so he said that
I never heard the Rabbi Haskell Lookstein part, but Rabbi Lamm used to share the the first part.
So he said that Rabbi Haskell's style was much different in the sense that he would write everything down. And he would write everything down, and he would have it in front of him, and I guess he would read off the notes. So my question is twofold: A, did Rabbi Joseph Lookstein use notes? And B, where did Rabbi Lamm fall into this? He clearly used notes, and it seemed that he's pretty much anchored to the notes. Did he ever speak extemporaneously? And where did he fit into that? The Joseph versus the Haskell model of sermon delivery?
Great question. It's definitely much closer to the Rabbi Haskell kind of style, although not born of trauma of watching your father go through this. Apparently, even people talk often about preachers' kids syndrome, right? That your parent is a rabbi or a pastor, whatever it might be, and you're running the other way. Apparently, even if you become a rabbi, you can still have trauma. So it just goes to show. But that was perhaps Rabbi Haskell. Rabbi Lamm, I think, was that wasn't how he worked. He was extremely. I would say he wasn't only polished in terms of his final delivery. His processes were extremely professionalized. Not because he didn't grow up in what was then a very Hamish environment, and that Yeshiva University at the time was very Hamish, and the rabbinate was very Hamish. Everything, it was a different era, but he just had this internal drive toward, if not perfection, toward excellence, toward personal organization. And you see that. You see this. We had, and it's not just true the drushos. His other writings and his correspondences. He did extraordinary work to create a filing system, and we now actually have some 51 boxes that he filed and organized, in his own professionalized sort of way that, God willing, will now be able to eventually see the light of day. And that's beyond these 800 drushos that are only because he was so systematic in his approach. So he took a very, very different approach. I think it was hardwired that way. It also helped that he didn't sleep very much. He really didn't need to sleep at all, or just very, very limited amount of time. So he would just stay up late in the nights, and he would just, make sure to really edit everything just right.
Yeah. And so, but did Rabbi Joseph speak without notes? Was that his style?
So I don't know. That's a good question. My guess is Shabbos perhaps less so, and the Amoraim, as I was saying, more so, but I don't know for sure. But that was certainly different than Rabbi Lamm's style. And what's interesting, though, is that was true for sermons. Those were fully written, and those were 100%. What he does have is a couple of things. First of all, some of the earliest sermons he has notes rather than written out fully. But you never have that again after something like 1954 or whatever it might be. If you have it, it's very rare. From time to time you do, but really very rare. What he does have notes for is less formal presentations. For example, when he went to his next pulpit, is 1954. He moves up to Spring. He's now married to Adele Lamb. They move to Springfield, and he begins there. I believe it's toward the very beginning of January of 1954.
This is Kadima?
This is yeah. So it's Kilat Kadima, no longer around, but it's at the time it was very interesting. It was a substantial pulpit then, but one that had fallen on relatively hard times, or didn't have wasn't the most beautiful building, and he really revitalized. Also, I should say there was a conservative option right there. That at that time, was the place to be. So this is an uphill battle, in a community in which Orthodoxy is not really established in that sort of way. And he really brings a new energy and excitement. He introduces children's programs, and he introduces them. The drashos themselves were a tremendous draw, and just really brings a new vibrancy and energy. So one of the things he did there was that he, Friday night services are, you were talking earlier about the difference between Orthodoxy then and Orthodoxy now. Shabbat morning, there was a critical mass of people. Friday nights when he came, it was next to nothing. So he instituted a special family Shabbat program, whether they come, this special tefillah, special program for children, and he would also give a special lecture. He did this over the course of a number of years. And those sometimes are fully written out, but more often than not, those are more rough notes, and you kind of get a sense he knew what he was going to say all the way through. It was scripted in the content sense, but not necessarily word for word. He also gave a lot of Pirkei Avos shiurim, those similarly. He didn't necessarily script those out, but during those months of the year, the summer months of the year, it was a little bit more extemporaneous. But generally, he was just very well prepared and very well documented.
Yeah. So again, he just trying to follow the trajectory again. He started off at KJ as a rabbinic intern, and then went to Westside Jewish Center. That was his first pulpit. Yeah. And then from there to Kadima.
Yeah. He doesn't go straight. It takes a couple of months, but then he does take Kadima.
What happened in between? Why didn't he stick around the Westside Jewish Center? Was there?
I don't know the whole story there. But it sounds like, I don't know how much there was there at the time. I don't really know the whole history, but sounds like they were, he's ready this is the trajectory. It was like a more substantial, if added down pulpit. It's kind of an adventure, was the right time for them. They didn't yet have any children, that sort of thing. Just recently married, I think it was right around the time that he got married. Shortly after that, they went to Kadima. So this is kind of like their, newlywed journey, as it were.
Yeah.
And so he starts there at the beginning of 1954.
And how long was he there for?
There for approximately 4.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's as I said, it was a challenging time. It's an exciting time because you see him really blossoming as a speaker, but you also see him blossoming as a leader. And the messages they start to change too.
Yeah. I noticed that, so one of the speeches you sent me was it was, I guess, inauguration of the new building, where
Yeah,
he came back,
yeah,
after. That was
yeah. It's
exciting.
amazing. I mean, you see, it's fascinating. So he's there for 4.5 years. Which is on the one hand a substantial amount of time, but on the other hand, it's not like he was there for decades. Um, but you get this sense that he's just so beloved because they invite him. He's there 4.5 years. He works on. I talked about like the just it's a decrepit building. He describes it in his drushos. They start this fundraising campaign. I don't have to tell you, started fundraising campaigns. Sometimes, if you're very fortunate, it happens very, very quickly. But there are a lot of stages and it's a lot of time. It launches under his leadership, but he leaves in 1958 to take the position at the Jewish Center. He doesn't end up seeing this to fruition. And even though he's there only 4.5 years, and even though those very sharp, polemical drushos at times will continue there, and he'll say like, if we're serious and we want our children to be Jewish, we have to think about, and to be Jewishly committed and marry Jewish and so on. We have to be serious about our Judaism. And this, like, and he basically says, like, an empty shell of like just showing up to an Orthodox synagogue, that's just not going to do it. You're going to lose your kids. Do you take this seriously or do you not? That was kind of like and this notion of like, everyone just wants to be like the American Joneses. Everyone just wants to be normal. Some of his drushos talks about, being average. Everyone just wants to be average at that time. It's the opposite of nowadays. Right now, every child is exceptional. Everyone's a genius. Everyone's a prodigy, right? If you're a coach or whatever it might be, you get fired if your team doesn't win the championship, like a major sports. Like there are 32 teams, let's say, in the NFL or whatever it is, right? Like they don't win the championship, your job security is on the line. It's a very different era. People, especially Jews, they just wanted to fit in. It was a time they felt like that was the way that they could avoid anti-Semitism. It was it was the melting pot. It wasn't yet the it was a cholent, if you want to use that metaphor, right? Not the salad bowl today, where identity really matters. So he rips them, and at times, of course, he's very beloved. But the fact that even though he's very honest with them and could be very, very, sharp with his musar, but he's invited back to give dedication, inaugural address for the shul that he helped to fundraise and he launched the process for. It's such a beautiful sign of the relationship he established in just in under 5 years.
Yeah. And he doesn't restrain from giving them mussar even at the inauguration, you see.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. It's such an amazing piece. I remember I was once on a listserv, and someone asked a question about thinking about what to speak about to a particular community around building the idea of building a new shul, the importance of a shul. And someone on this listserv immediately recommends, you check out Rabbi Lamm's sermon when he went back to Springfield, in I think it was 1963 already. This is 5 years out. He was out for probably, I believe, longer than he had actually served in the shul. He invited him back. And he doesn't hold back, and it's exactly this message, right? It's right. It can't be edifice complex. It can't be that we worship the building for the sake of the building. Although he says his thank yous, and he starts with with all of that. But in the end, if there's no soul, if there's no substance, we're dead. It's over. Now, there, in fairness, he had already finished, right? So, like, gives his piece, right? And then he says, invite me back as summer resident, so 10 years, whatever, happy to come back and visit. So it wasn't putting himself on the line in the same way. But you know what? If you look at the drushos he gave previously, if you look at the drushos he was giving the Jewish Center, it was all cut from the same cloth. I think people really appreciated that he took them so seriously, and he took his Judaism so seriously, that he was actually willing to respectfully and thoughtfully, but constructively, call people out.
Yeah.
Just don't make it like that.
I noticed in that speech there was he told a funny story about a person, the wealthy person who raised his hand during a pledge, and he pledged $25 to the building, and then a piece of plaster fell off the ceiling and hit him on the head. He said, I'll raise it to 100, and the rabbi says, hit him again, God.
Oh yeah.
Was that indicative of a typical of how he used to use humor? Would he use humor in his sermons a lot, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. He's actually noted for not going out of his way to use humor that much, even though it was very interesting because very dry wit. He was a very funny person. Just people in the family that know him, and others that know him. I know Rabbi Gigi Schachter has remarked on his Rabbi Lamm's brilliant wit, and really, really remarkable. He was talking as like one story where he went back and forth, and I'm gonna butcher the Yiddish, but he was talking with Dr. Yosef Berg, who was a big Mizrahi person, very like-minded with Rabbi Lamm, and they were very close. And Rabbi Lamm gave him a hesped, his maspedim after he passed away. They had some exchange where Rabbi Berg was kind of elbowing Rabbi Lamm, kind of poking some fun at him for not making Aliyah, and he uses it's Parshas Vayera, and you just see each other just like randomly, and he uses Behar Hashem Yira'eh, which is the phrase that appears after the Akedah, right? The Akedah, and he refers to Dr. Berg. Berg, his name comes from the same like shoresh. He's like playing all sorts of creative word puns and word games with this, and ingeniously so. Basically the upshot was also like it was a shtach. Basically, Berg was saying to that Rabbi Lamm knew when is the right. He said right. So he was saying, when is the lamb going to make aliyah? So Rabbi Lamm said, "Behar Hashem Yiroeh," just like Abraham, right? So that was his retort, right? Which he used to say in Yiddish that basically when Har Hashem is a reference, to Rabbi Berg, when he himself will bring Eretz Yisrael to a higher level, right? And he will reach a higher level. When it makes sense for Rabbi Lamm to make Aliyah, then he'll consider it. But until then, he's not done. So yeah, like this mastery of wit and language, and they're just doing this, One says, Ayeh Haseli Allah. The other one says, Baharash and just boom, it's Parshas Vayera. Brilliant. You can't make this stuff up. He doesn't use humor that much, though, in his drashos. And I think it's because he doesn't want to be seen as gimmicky. I think like a lot of times, very interesting. Yeah, someone else pointed this out to me. So, rabbis are taught nowadays, you have to start with the hook. You have to start with a story, with an anecdote, with something. And Rabbi Lamm doesn't have a hook. And I said, it's not necessarily the case. I said, I think Rabbi Lamm's hook was a really, really interesting, compelling point from the Torah that really resonated with this audience and would really bother them. And I think that they really appreciated that he took them so seriously that he knew that if you ask the question right, just jump right into the Torah. I would say 90% of his drashos begin that way, between 80 and 90%. That was actually a hook for them, and that told them that Torah, if it's done right, is a hook in itself. It doesn't need something else. So he wasn't gimmicky that way. But of course, he does use humor, and the way he uses humor is in the same way. It's kind of like this wry, slightly sarcastic sense of humor, like you were saying, that's sometimes self-deprecatory, that this sort of thing. And also one that his people could relate to, because Kadima, the reason he told that story at Kadima is because part of what motivated to build the new shuls was they had a leak in their roof.
Mm-hmm.
So this is brilliant because he knows the story, but it's a story, right? It's a double entendre, right?
Yeah,
exactly, and it's literally riffing on the experiences that they themselves had. So even when he told humor, it was for a purpose. It was pointed. It wasn't just like a shtick to get you to pay attention. It's like
intentional,
directly to the heart of what he wanted to say, and then he just said it.
Yeah. So where did he end up after Kadima?
So 1958, he gets a very significant and exciting offer to join the rabbinic staff, technically the senior at the Jewish Center in Manhattan, which is a very prominent non-Orthodox pulpit, kind of opportunity that you really don't pass up, and one that he felt very strongly was just very much the right fit for him, for his growing family, still very young children at that time. And I think some of them were born in New York, some of them were born in Springfield. So it's just very, very exciting. He's there with Rabbi Leo Young for many, 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 many years. Ultimately, Rabbi Lamm becomes a senior rabbi, but most of the time it's very interesting. They actually were not co-rabbis technically, but they would split the sermons. And this is a really interesting thing. He didn't speak every week. He actually spoke every other week from the time he came to the Jewish Center in 1958.
That's what he alludes to in the notes from an unrepentant darshan that he would alternate.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's what he's talking about. That even he doesn't say it this way, obviously, but even we can say it this way. Even someone as great as Rabbi Lamm, recognized that having the opportunity to speak every other week, most of the time, elevated his drushos. It just gave him the time to think and just to be. And it's really interesting. It's like, most people who haven't tried something don't necessarily know how easy or difficult it might be.
Yeah.
And like I remember hearing this from people. One time I was at a particular shul, and one of the congregants the rabbi was away, and they say it was a small shul, volunteered to give this sermon. He comes over to me because I wasn't the rabbi of the shul. Smicha, he comes like, Rabbi, that was really hard. How do you rabbis do this every single week? And it was sort of that thing, and he understood that all too well. So yeah, he credited that as allowing him to reach a new level in his sermonics.
Yeah. I feel like we're going to have to do a part 2 because this is we're almost out of time, and this is so good. Yeah. I want to hear the next era where he became,
sure,
I guess, the president of YU afterwards. And
we didn't even talk about the Jewish Center.
Yeah. So maybe we'll cap it at this. I want to leave on a cliffhanger. I'm just curious, because of his sharp attitude towards certain elements of American Jewry. Did he experience pushback? Did he experience threats? Was there a conflict?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You would imagine the answer might be yes. But I would say is that there were definitely people who did not agree with his sermons, and they would let him know. And he was very welcoming for people to come and to let him know. This he got from the Rev. Rav Soloveitchik would always say, "I never said kabul da'ati. I'm not your Hasidic Rebbe. I'm not here to bless. I'm not here to bless your gefilte fish, or your apples, or whatever it might be. You should. I'm your Rebbe, and as your Rebbe, I want to teach you. I want to teach you to think for yourself." So that was very much his approach with his congregants who were his students in that regard. So I wouldn't say that he got. I wouldn't say that there were any major conflicts, but there are definitely moments where you see in his drashos, and just to mention one that came up, it was a significant one in the context of the Jewish Center, is when it came to Vietnam. So we talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that'll be a great cliffhanger. That's really good. Okay, all right. I'm going to wish you a good Shabbos, and let's reconnect maybe and set up a time for Tuesday.